Good evening, and welcome to this week's edition of The Message. I am your host, Donatus King. We'll spend this next hour with one purpose in mind, and that one purpose is delivering the message that God is Almighty. Everything that ever was, is now, or ever will be was made by God. Everything that ever happened, is happening right now, or ever will happen, was made to happen by God. God has a master plan for all time and all creation. God is Almighty. The message is brought to you by, is produced by the Society of Knowledge Incorporated. The Society is an interdenominational, religious, spiritual organization. Our members come from various different religious and spiritual backgrounds. We have various different religious and spiritual beliefs. Although we come from different backgrounds and have different beliefs, there's one belief that we hold in common. There's one piece of knowledge that we share. And that's the knowledge that there is a being, by no matter what name we may have been taught to call that being, by no matter what name we may have come to know that being, whether that name be God, Allah, Yahweh, Jesus, Buddha, Jehovah, Osiris, nature, by no matter what name, we know that there is a being that possesses not some of the power, not most of the power, but all of the power. We know that there is indeed an almighty being. That's the reason we do this show, and the only reason we do this show, to deliver the message that that being that personally I call God, that being is indeed almighty. Today is April the 26th, 2018. I remind you of that fact because tonight, as we are on most Thursdays, we are live. And I remind you of that fact because this show is an open discussion. It's a two-way conversation. Those of you that are watching by Facebook, I invite you to leave a comment. Those of you that are watching on television, I invite you to call in. You see the telephone number that's on your screen, and that number is 504-483-3336. Call in and join the discussion. Those of you that are watching by Facebook, post a comment, and we'll do everything that I can to make sure that we share that comment with our viewing audience. So join in, call, or post a Facebook comment. If there's something that's going on in your church, your mosque, your masjid, your temple, your synagogue, your place of worship, and you want to share that information with the world, call in or post a comment on Facebook. If there's something that's going on in your nonprofit organization and you want to share that information with the world, call in or post a comment on Facebook. More important than what's going on in your place of worship, more important than what's going on in your nonprofit organization, if there's something that God has done for you in your life, a miracle that God has worked in your life. And I use that term literally a miracle, because the God that I'm here to tell you about tonight works miracles. We read about miracles that God worked thousands and thousands of years ago, but I'm here to tell you that God is working miracles even today. April 26, 2018, God is working miracles. So if God has worked a miracle in your life, call in or post your comment, share your testimony. You know, it may be someone that's watching this show either on Facebook or watching on TV, and this show is being seen, as I said, around the world. Someone that's watching this show that might be in need of a miracle. It may be someone that's having some health problems. Medicine hasn't worked. The doctor's offering no hope. Maybe you've had a similar problem and God worked a miracle in your life and cured your body, took away your sickness. Share your testimony. Hearing your testimony might be the one thing that someone needs to hear that will strengthen them, encourage them, to help them hold on until God works a miracle in their life. So share your testimony, call in, or post your comment on Facebook. We're going to, we have a lot of ground that we're going to be covering tonight. And the way the program works, we have announcements. I'm going to read some announcements off. They're going to be posted on the bulletin board. If you have some announcements, call in and we'll get those over the air. You can post them on Facebook and I'll read them off, share that with our viewers. After our announcements, then we have testimonies, but I don't think we have any testimonies tonight. Then we'll go into our religious spiritual discussion, and during that portion, that section, segment of our broadcast, we talk about various different religious and spiritual issues, okay, various different issues. spiritual issues, religious issues, all different types of topics. And after our religious spiritual discussion, then we come with our words of inspiration, where we really drive home that message that God is Almighty. So having said that, let's get into our announcements. Let's get into our announcements. And Brother Duvall, thank you. Thank you for joining us on Facebook. Hope things are going well with you. I saw you had a few issues a week or so ago, but I'm hoping that you're feeling okay. Sister Karen, Cousin Karen, I know that you're watching also. Thank you. Brother Dwayne, Sister Eugenia, thank you for joining us on Facebook. And tonight we're going to be talking, I'm not going to give it away. We have a topic that's kind of popular right now that we'll be discussing. Announcement, testimonies, religious spiritual study, prove all things, hold fast that which is good, coming out of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 21. And I will give it away right now. We'll be discussing tonight, is Ethiopia the real Wakanda? Is Ethiopia the real Wakanda? But now those of you that don't know what Wakanda is, this is what they call a spoiler alert. If you have not seen the movie The Black Panther, well, I'm going to give away some of what goes on. Wakanda is a mythical country, and actually the Black Panther, that movie, and that character, the Black Panther, really is not anything new, but that's been a Marvel Comics character since 1966. Okay, it just goes to show you, since 1966. But anyway, Wakanda is a mythical, a made-up, make-believe country located in Africa. And I started preparing for tonight's show, and it didn't have anything to do with Wakanda, but it was about Ethiopia. And in my studies of Ethiopia, what I learned was that Ethiopia, a lot of what we think came from other places actually originated in Ethiopia. And really how the Spirit led me to studying about Ethiopia was studying up on Christianity, studying up on Judaism. As you know, Jesus Christ was a Jew. And as you know, the Jews originated in Babylon, Ur the Chaldees. That's where Abraham came from. And by doing that studying and trying to trace things back, as far as I could go, eventually it led through Egypt. And we learn, we read in the Bible about how Abraham traveled to Egypt. We read in the Bible about how Jesus Christ traveled to Egypt when he was a little boy. And the scripture tells us that while he was there, he grew in knowledge. Okay, so he went there to learn some stuff. And studying Egypt led me into learning a little bit more about the history of the Egyptians. And that led me to Ethiopia. And reading about and studying about Ethiopia, there are a number of things that I learned I didn't know that surprised me. And as I was studying about Ethiopia, I start seeing striking parallels between Ethiopia and this fictitious country called Wakanda. Striking parallels. And I'll highlight those as we get into our discussion. And before I go there, a lot of reality stems from fiction. I can remember when I was a little boy reading the funny papers, the comics. And there was a little fella, there was a guy in there called Dick Tracy. And Dick Tracy, I'm talking about 50 years ago, Dick Tracy would walk around and he had a wristwatch. And he'd look in his wristwatch and talk into his wristwatch. And that was something fantastic. Okay, that was some made-believe, made-up stuff. But nowadays, we have that in reality. We have wristwatches. We have these smartphones where you go on the internet. Okay? So a lot of reality actually has its base and its genesis in what some folks would call make-believe. But we'll go into that a little bit more a little later on. Brother Gary, Brother Robert, thank you for tuning in on Facebook, and hopefully that you have some comments, some knowledge that you can share with us as we discuss our topic tonight. And that topic is Ethiopia the real Wakanda? Words of inspiration tonight will come out of the book of Genesis, chapter 47, verses 22 to 31. Announcements, main website, www.godisalmighty.org. I invite you to visit that website, lock it into your web browser. There are links to all of our social media outlets, so lock that into your web browser. Rock of Ages Ministries International, Apostle Ronnie Bailey, that's his main website, www.ronniebailey.com. New Orleans Peacekeepers, if there's somebody that's having a dispute in the city of New Orleans or surrounding areas, give the Peacekeepers a call. That number, 504-500-1706. They'll come out and actually help folks talk through whatever dispute they're having. So give the Peacekeepers a call. In the New Orleans area, call 311 from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. for free smoke detectors. Dillard University has senior citizens lunch, and for more information you can call 504-816-4959. Testimonies, we do not have any testimonies tonight, but we do have a jam-packed show. Religious spiritual study, prove all things, hold fast that which is good, coming out of the first book of Thessalonians, chapters 5, verse 21. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good. I'm going to read through some stuff tonight, and I've kind of tried to get away from just reading stuff and talking. I've gotten to wanting to have things like have more pictures and videos and stuff like that, so that it wouldn't be boring. But tonight we're going to do, not entertainment, but a little bit teaching tonight. So I'm going to be doing some reading, and again, the topic is Ethiopia, the real Wakanda. As Thessalonians say, don't take anything that I say here to be gospel. Don't take it just to be true. Prove it for yourself. Okay, do your own research. And if you find anything that I say on this show to not be factually correct, then let me know. Those of you that are watching by Facebook, post a comment. Let me know. Say, Brother King, well, look, here's some more information about this issue. Those of you that are watching by TV, just call in and let me know. But let's get started. Having said all of that, is Ethiopia the real Wakanda? I'm going to read tonight some information, and this is stuff that I got off the web. Okay, and the website that I went to, I went to a few, quite a few. I did some research, but what I'll be reading from tonight is some information from one website, and that website is www.taneter.org. That's www.taneter.org and / Ethiopia. And the title of the article is Ancient Kush or Ethiopia. The other materials I'll be reading comes from a site, Rasta Livewire, and that site is www.africaresource, AFRICARESOURCE.com, www.africaresource.com / Rasta, RASTA / Sestotris, SESOSTRIS. Okay, so Rasta Livewire and www.africaresource.com Taneter. I'm going to start off with reading some information from Rasta Livewire, and you know there's a popular phrase now, and that popular phrase that's been made popular by the current president of the United States, and that phrase is fake news. Okay, fake news. Dee, thank you for joining us on Facebook. Okay, fake news, and fake news is not anything new. Okay, there's been propaganda from the beginning of recorded time. Okay, propaganda. We read the Bible and we read about propaganda. We read about fake news in the Bible. You know, so fake news, nothing new. Now, a lot of times when I'm doing research, I want to check as many different sources as I can find. So if I'm reading something and it makes a statement of fact, then I do a lot of searching to find out if there are other sources that have that same statement of fact. And when you're doing your research, you got to watch out, because sometimes you might have 8 or 9 different sources that are quoting the same source. You might have 8 or 9 different sources that are saying the sky is blue, but they all got that information from somebody called John. So when you find out that John was wrong, then you got 8 or 9 folks that are saying the wrong thing, because all of them are quoting John. So when you're doing your research, you know, make sure that when you're checking out these different sources, that everything that you're reading is not coming from the same source. You want to have independent verification. And so as I read through this, you know, we're going to start out, and I'm going to, and I'm saying all that because the first source I'm going to read, and that's Rasta Livewire. Rasta Livewire's source information, where they got their information, comes from somebody that lived more than 2,000 years ago. More than 2,000 years ago. And that person that is being quoted here, for all of you history students, you know, students of history, the academic subject of history, you know this name, and that is Diodorus Siculus. Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian who lived from 90 BC to 21 BC. So 90 years before Christ, Diodorus was on this earth. And he is a famous, one of the most famous historians from over 2,000 years ago. And this is what he had to write about Ethiopia. Now the Ethiopians, and let me spell his name out so you know you can Google it for yourself, do your own research. Diodorus, Diodorus, Siculus, Siculus, Diodorus, Siculus. All right. Now this is his words. This is what Diodorus wrote more than 2,000 years ago. Now the Ethiopians, as historians relate, were the first of all men, and the proofs of this statement, they say, are manifest, for that they did not come into their land as immigrants from abroad, but were natives of it, and so justly bear the name of autochthons, is they maintain, conceded by practically all men. Furthermore, listen to this, furthermore, that those who dwell beneath the noonday sun were, in all likelihood, the first to be generated by the earth is clear to all. Okay, so again, proof that the Ethiopians were the first men, and that's backed up by other science. And some of you may know about Leakey, who discovered these skeletons in Africa, leading to the scientific conclusion that the humankind originated in Africa. All right? Since inasmuch as it was the warmth of the sun which, at the generation of the universe, dried up the earth when it was still wet and impregnated it with life, it is reasonable to suppose that the region which was nearest the sun was the first to bring forth living creatures. Okay? That's Africa. All right? And they say that they were the first to be taught to honor the gods and to hold sacrifices and processions and festivals and the other rites by which men honor the deity, and that in consequence their piety has been published abroad among all men, and it is generally held that the sacrifices practiced among the Ethiopians are those which are the most pleasing to heaven. So this is a Greek historian that's writing this about the Ethiopians more than 2,000 years ago. As witnesses to this, they call upon the poet who is perhaps the oldest and certainly the most venerated among the Greeks. For in the Iliad, he represents both Zeus and the rest of the gods with him as absent on a visit to Ethiopia to share in the sacrifices of the banquet which were given annually by the Ethiopians for all the gods together. So now, those of you that know anything about Greek mythology, the Iliad speaks about the Ethiopians. For Zeus had yesterday to ocean's bounds set forth to feast with Ethiop's faultless men, and he was followed there by all the gods. And they stayed there by reason of their piety towards the deity. They manifestly enjoy the favor of the gods, inasmuch as they have never... Now this, I'm going to slow down here because I got to spend a minute or two on this point here. Now this was written 2,000 years ago, more than 2,000 years ago. They manifestly enjoy the favor of the gods, inasmuch as they have never experienced the rule of an invader from abroad. For from all time they have enjoyed a state of freedom of peace with one another, and although many and powerful rulers have made war upon them, not one of these has succeeded in this undertaking. Now, what caught my eye about that is that this is Diodorus speaking about the Ethiopians more than 2,000 years ago. And he's saying that, look, the Ethiopians are really favored by the gods because nobody has conquered them. Okay? So when Diodorus was writing history and about what was going on about all these other countries, history is replete, is full of discussions about countries being taken over and conquered by other countries. But here, Diodorus takes the time to point out that there's something special about Ethiopia because they have never been conquered. Now, what caught my eye on that is that in my earlier studies about Ethiopia, not ancient Ethiopia, but I say Ethiopia within the last 500-600 years, that right there is a point that's made by historians, not about ancient Ethiopia 2,000 years ago, but about current Ethiopia. And what is highlighted is that, for those of you that may not be aware, the continent of Africa was colonized. And by colonized, that means that the Europeans, and this occurred, I think, about 500-600 years ago, the Europeans got together in Europe and said, we're going to go take over everything in Africa. We're going to take it over. Literally. Okay, do your own research on that. And what they did, the Europeans, the different European countries, they carved it up. And they said, well, look, you're going to have this one, France, you're going to have this one, Germany, you're going to have that African country, England, you're going to have that African country. Italy, you're going to have that one. Greece, you're going to have that. They carved it up. And they made an agreement that they wouldn't try to poach on each other's African colonies. So that's why there's a whole lot of Africa that's still subjugated one way or another to some European powers. But the odd thing about it, when you read, Ethiopia was one of, if not the only, African country that was never colonized. Never colonized. See, and I had read that before, I had learned that. But then when I read through this ancient history, when I read what this Greek historian said more than 2,000 years ago about Ethiopia had never been conquered, never been colonized, even 2,000 years ago, that got my head to scratching. Say, wait a minute. If 2,000 years ago Ethiopia hadn't been colonized and everything else around it had been colonized, and if now with all these folks that had all these modern weapons and stuff and all these fantastic armies, if they couldn't colonize Ethiopia, something's happening with Ethiopia. Something's going on there. And then when I started doing this research about ancient Ethiopia and reading about how Diodorus was saying that Ethiopia had something special going on, that they had the favor of the gods, that started making me think even more, what's going on with Ethiopia? Do they have some kind of secret weapon? What's happening? All right, and now I'm just going to open the door up just a little bit. That's what started making me see this kind of parallel with Wakanda. See, for those of you that have not seen the movie, Wakanda is a fictional nation in Africa, and you see it on the screen now. This is the fictional, and where you see that gold thing up there with that's supposed to be a panther. Okay, that's supposedly the area of Wakanda, the fictional. But look right underneath here. Okay, this really is the African continent, and that really is Ethiopia. So now, ain't that a coincidence? Ain't that a coincidence that this Wakanda happens to be near Ethiopia? And when we start looking at some of the parallels between Wakanda and Ethiopia, that raised the question, is Ethiopia the real Wakanda? Now, for some of those that are not familiar, didn't see the movie, what Wakanda was, it shows, the movie starts out and it shows a picture of this African country, African landscape, and folks out there, like the stuff you see in the movies, the old movies, Tarzan movies and stuff, with people with the African stuff on, working in the fields, uncivilized, just primitive. And then the next thing you know is like the folks go through some kind of, it's not a time warp, but it's like some kind of force field that they go through, entering into Wakanda. They duck behind like a hill, and the next thing you know, they done entered into an area that has all kind of advanced technology and flying, all this kind of stuff, and just superior technology. And not to give the whole story away, so that's the real Wakanda, but it's got like this cloak, not cloak of invisibility, but this cloak covering it up, that if you can't get beyond that cloak, it's going to just look like some kind of rural country thing. But if you get by that, you're going to see this advanced technological place. And they got some kind of special resource there. I'm going to give the whole movie away. Okay? They got some kind of special resource there, special ore. Okay? It's a special rock that got some powers to it. that's allowed them to become so advanced technologically, more advanced than all the rest of the earth, any other country on the earth. They're more advanced. But they was keeping that stuff a secret. That's why they had this cloak of invisibility that nobody didn't really know the real Wakanda. Yeah. All right. And somebody stole a piece of that rock and they was getting ready to use it for bad reasons. Somebody that was outside of Wakanda. So that's the whole, I done gave up the whole story now. But I'm going to say one other thing. The whole story really revolved around them trying to get that rock back, okay? They're trying to get it back and bring it back to Wakanda before the evil folks could put it to evil purposes. And the rock, I'm giving the whole story away. The rock was all made up to look like an artifact. Okay, an artifact. Okay, it wasn't looking like just something real special, but an artifact. You know, like people nowadays, they go to Egypt and find an old piece of clay pot or old statue or something. They call it an artifact. Well, that's what this rock. It didn't look like nothing special. It was like an artifact. But it really was this special rock, okay, with the special powers. And the Wakandians were trying to get it back. Now, see something that struck me. Just last week, you might have read this in the newspaper. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But in the newspaper this past week, it was a story. It was buried on page 137 in the newspaper. Down at the very bottom, in the corner, a little bitty article that spoke about a dispute that has arisen right now between Ethiopia and I think it's the English, whereas the Ethiopians are demanding, guess what they're demanding? They're demanding return of artifacts. Artifacts that were stolen from Ethiopia over 300 years ago. Hold on. Okay, stolen artifacts from Ethiopia. Ethiopia trying to get them back. That's real life. Okay, Wakanda, stolen artifacts. The Wakanda's trying to get them back. Wakanda's sitting there by Ethiopia. Ethiopia in real life got something special going on where they've never been conquered. Wakanda, even though it looks like a little poor country, got something going on where nobody has conquered them. All these different parallels. But anyway, let me go on now to read a little bit more about the real life Ethiopia. Thank you, Brother Robert, for joining in on Facebook. Cambyses, for instance, now this is Diodorus Siculus, okay, a Greek historian. Cambyses, for instance, they say, who made war upon them with great force, both, listen to this, okay, for those of you that know anything about history, all right, Cambyses, for instance, they say, who made war upon them, that's Ethiopia, with a great force, both lost all his army and was himself exposed to the greatest peril. Semiramis also, who through the magnitude of her undertakings and achievements has become renowned, after advancing a short distance into Ethiopia, gave up her campaign against the whole nation, and Heracles and Dionysus, although they visited all the inhabited earth, failed to subdue the Ethiopians alone who dwell above Egypt, both because of the piety of these men and because of the insurmountable difficulties involved in the attempt. So more than 2,000 years ago, the historians were writing about something special going on in Ethiopia, that they were able to defeat all of these world powers. Now look at this. This stuff here, I tell you, it gets better and better. Look, all of us, when we're doing some studying, we study about Egypt, and we see King Tut and all the rest of that, and we marvel about that, and we look at all of the pyramids that are in Egypt, that are in Cairo, and they call that one of the wonders of the world. And people talk about the libraries of Alexandria, about how smart the Egyptians were, and all this and all that. But listen to this. Okay, listen to this. This is Diodorus 2,000 years ago. Look what he says. He says, they say also that the Egyptians are colonists sent out by the Ethiopians. So as great and powerful as folks want to talk about the Egyptians being, history says that they were just colonists sent out by the Ethiopians. Osiris having been the leader of the colony. And anybody that studies Egyptian religion, you know who Osiris was. But now here we're reading that Diodorus says that, well, Osiris, really, he was an Ethiopian that was sent out to Egypt. For speaking generally, what is now Egypt, they maintain, was not land but sea, when in the beginning the universe was being formed. Afterwards, however, as the Nile during the times of its inundation carried down the mud from Ethiopia, land was gradually built up from the deposit. Okay, so just for a little history and a little geography, when you look at Egypt, Egypt actually sits down at a lower elevation. Okay, so Egypt, right there at the Mediterranean Sea, it sits low. And as you come south, you rise up into the mountains. And so the Nile River flows down the mountain into the sea. And the Nile River, at the end of the Nile River, that's where Egypt is. Okay? But at the top, where the Nile River starts, that's where you come into Ethiopia. So it's just like here in Louisiana, where all of the rich soil flowing down the Mississippi River, coming from all the way up in the Midwest, the Mississippi River coming all the way through Missouri, flowing all the way to Ohio, coming all the way down to Louisiana, picking up all that dirt and depositing it at the mouth of the river. That's the same thing that was happening at the Nile. And this is what we're reading about right now on how Egypt became built up. Also, the statement that all the land of the Egyptians is alluvial silt deposited by the river receives the clearest proof, in their opinion, from what takes place at the outlets of the Nile. For as each year new mud is continually gathered together at the mouths of the river, the sea is observed being thrust back by the deposited silt, and the land receiving the increase. This is 2,000 years ago. This was written by Diodorus. And the larger part of the customs of the Egyptians are, they hold, Ethiopian. So the larger part of the Egyptian customs are Ethiopian. The colonists still preserving their ancient manners. For instance, the belief that their kings are gods, the very special attention which they pay to their burials, and many other matters of similar nature are Ethiopian practices, while the shapes of their statues and the forms of their letters are Ethiopian. For of the two kinds of writing which the Egyptians have, that which is known as popular, demotic, is learned by everyone, while that which is called sacred is understood only by the priests of the Egyptians, who learn it from their fathers as one of the things which are not divulged, that's secret knowledge. But among the Ethiopians, everyone uses these forms of letters. Furthermore, the orders of the priests, they maintain, have much the same position among both peoples, for all are clean who are engaged in the service of the gods, keeping themselves shaven, like the Ethiopian priests, and having the same dress and form of staff, which is shaped like a plow, and is carried by their kings, who wear high felt hats which end in a knob at the top, and are circled by the serpents, which they call asps. Okay, we talked about those serpents a couple of weeks ago. Brother Eddie, thank you for joining us on Facebook. Many other things are also told by them concerning their own antiquity and the colony which they sent out that became the Egyptians. But about this, there is no special need of our writing anything. We must now speak about the Ethiopian writing, which is called hieroglyphic among the Egyptians, in order that we may omit nothing in our discussion of their antiquities. Now it is found that the forms of their letters take the shape of animals of every kind, and of the members of the human body, and of implements, and especially carpenter's tools, for their writing does not express the intended concept by means of syllables joined one to another, but by means of the significance of the objects which have been copied by its figurative meaning, which has been impressed upon the memory by practice. For instance, they draw the picture of a hawk, a crocodile, a snake, and of the members of the human body, an eye, a hand, a face, and the like. Now the hawk signifies to them everything which happens swiftly, since this animal is practically the swiftest of winged creatures. And the concept portrayed is then transferred by the appropriate metaphorical transfer to all swift things and to everything to which swiftness is appropriate, very much as if they had been named. And the crocodile is a symbol of all that is evil, and the eye is the water of justice and the guardian of the entire body. And as for the members of the body, the right hand with fingers extended signifies a procuring of livelihood, and the left with the fingers closed, a keeping and guarding of property. The same way of reasoning applies also to the remaining characters, which represent parts of the body and implements and all other things, for by paying close attention to the significance which is inherent in each object, and by training their minds through drill and exercise of the memory over a long period, they read from habit everything which has been written. Okay, now there's more to it, but that's a good starting point for you to learn and remember. What I was reading just now was written more than 2,000 years ago by somebody Greek. He wasn't Ethiopian, so he didn't have an interest in making the Ethiopians appear to be like such a big deal. The Ethiopians were a different race of people from him. But this is what that historian wrote 2,000 years ago. Now this, and I'm going to have to run because we are running out of time. But this is from a website, www.taneter, Ancient Kush, or Ethiopia. Now this is, I'm just going to read it out, and I'm going to try not to do too much editorializing. Prior to Greek history, Ethiopia was known as Kush by the ancient Egyptians. The Buin stela, housed in the Florence Museum, which dates from the reign of Seti I, 1294 to 1279 BC, refers to this region as Kas and Kash. Kush is also mentioned as KSH in other texts dated between 1550 to 1069 BC. So we're talking, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. The region known as Kush has been inhabited for several millennia. Royal Ontario Museum and University of Khartoum researchers found a tool workshop south of Dongola, Sudan, with thousands of Paleolithic axes on rolls of stones dating back 70,000 years. So now we see tools, okay, rolls of axes dating back 70,000 years. As early as 13,000 BC, ceremonial burial practice were taking place at Jebel Sahaba in Wadi Halfa in the northern part of modern-day Sudan, known to archaeologists as the Canaan period, 13,000, 8,000 BC. At the Toshka site in modern-day Lower Nubia, archaeologists have uncovered tombs where domesticated wild cattle were placed above human remains, indicative of the use of cattle in a ceremonial fashion. Circular tomb walls with high with above-ground mounds are further evidence of the beginnings of ceremonial burials. All right? Now look at this, and look just how subtle this is. And we talk about the whitewashing of history, okay, the whitewashing. At other sites nearby, we can see the development of Ethiopian, better known as Egyptian, civilization. So now we can see the authors, even the authors of this particular piece, trying to take the emphasis off of Ethiopians, which are undeniably dark-skinned African people, and put that to Egyptians, which in modern times, Egyptians are a lighter-skinned people. Okay? So they're saying Ethiopians, better known as Egyptians. No, Ethiopians are Ethiopians. Egyptians, that's a word that's been used to supplant the true Ethiopians. All right, let's go on. I've got to move on there. Okay, I'm skipping a little bit, but you go to the site yourself. You can read the whole article. Therefore, Cushitic civilization began on the banks of the Nile over 15,000 years ago and was settled at least 55,000 years prior. So the civilization, the Kush civilization, didn't begin on the banks of the Nile. As we read just now, that Diodorus told us that no, what happened on the banks of the Nile, particularly the lower Nile, that flowed from Ethiopia. That Kush started in Ethiopia. Okay, furthermore, based on the traditions of the first settlers and the artifacts found in this region, Cushitic civilization gave, now look at a little bit, look at this. Based on the traditions of the first settlers and the artifacts found in this region, Cushitic civilization gave birth to that of so-called Egypt. All right? So the Cushites gave birth to what is so-called Egypt. All right? And they say here, see also the Nile Valley civilization. All right? Now this little section here is called Ethiopia in Hebrew history, 1200 to 500 BC. And I'm going to really run through here. The Torah, the Old Testament of the Bible, mentions Ethiopia in its first and oldest book, Genesis chapter 2, around 1400 BC, and puts Ethiopia in a geographical context. Brother Eddie, thank you for joining. Sister Tamika, thank you for joining on Facebook. And this is coming out of Genesis chapter 2. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. And the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compassed the whole land of Ethiopia. In the Hebrew book of Numbers, chapter 12, verse 1, and this is around 1200 BC, Moses, who was born and educated in Egypt, married an Ethiopian woman. Okay, this is Hebrew, chapter 12, verse 1. And Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. Remember when Moses was out there in that desert, he learned a whole lot of stuff. A whole lot of stuff. So a lot of that stuff that we read about Moses doing, all that magic and all the rest of that, said that he had married an Ethiopian woman. All right. By the 740s BC, the Hebrew prophet Nahum said, Cush and Ethiopia were her Nineveh's boundless strength. It was infinite. Put in Luban were thy helpers. So now we see where the Ethiopians come to the aid of those Hebrews. Ethiopia's king Taharka, who also ruled Egypt, is mentioned in Hebrew texts as having saved Jerusalem from Assyrian destruction. That's in Isaiah chapter 37, verses 10 through 11. Quote, "And when he heard say of Tekoa, king of Ethiopia, behold, he is come out to fight against thee, he sent messengers again unto Hezekiah, saying, Thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, Let not thy God in whom thou trustest deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria." All right, Ethiopian Greek history, 800 BC to 200 AD. Few other nations are mentioned in ancient European literature as much as Ethiopia, and even fewer as highly esteemed. Ethiopians are first mentioned in the oldest of Greek texts, Homer's Iliad, and we read a little bit earlier some of the excerpts from the Iliad, as a place frequented by the Greek gods. Homer states, 12 for Jupiter stayed with the Ethiopians, at whose return Thetis prefers her petition, and Zeus is at Ocean's river with Ethiopians. All right, so this is, it also speaks of Herodotus. Herodotus, another historian, I told you about that. In his publication, Histories, Book 2, and this is around 440 BC, informs us that Ethiopians also jointly ruled over the Siwa Oasis. All right. So there's a whole lot of information, about Ethiopia, and what I stated earlier. And when you read about Ethiopia, particularly ancient Ethiopia, and I'm talking about ancient more than 2,000 years ago, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 years ago. All of the historians speak about how rich that area was and still is with certain minerals, particularly gold. And as I stated earlier, throughout recorded history, and you heard what Diodorus had to say, that all these powerful nations were never able to conquer Ethiopia, as relatively small as it is. So all of those, now you might see why I question whether or not there is a parallel between Ethiopia and Wakanda. Is there indeed, as Diodorus stated, is there indeed some special connection between Ethiopia and the powers that be? And I'm going to say the powers that be, because the scriptures talk about powers and principalities and the rest of that. Is there something going on in Ethiopia? Why is it that Almighty God, thank you for scrolling down a little bit, why is it that Almighty God has seen forth to preserve Ethiopia from plunder, preserve Ethiopia from being colonized, preserve Ethiopia even in this modern day as being an independent nation? All questions. But again, as I said, Thessalonians says, what? Prove all things, hold fast that which is good. I gave you some good starting points for those of you that haven't done any research in that before. Some good starting points, those websites, and if you didn't get a chance to copy that information down, just hit me up on Facebook, and I will get that information to you. Or you can give me a call. Give me a call at the office, and that number is area code 504-821-3221. You can call right now, and someone will, at least a machine will answer, and I'll get the message and return your call. So I thank all of you for watching tonight. And as I said at the very beginning of the show, the purpose of this show, one purpose, and that's to deliver the message that God is almighty. And God is so almighty, our minds are not big enough to understand and know everything that God can do. Whether or not there are different dimensions, whether or not there are different powers, as the Bible talks about different powers and different dimensions, spiritual beings and all the rest of that. Whether or not all that's true, one thing that I have no doubt about, I have no doubt whatsoever that there is a being that I call God that is in control of everything. As a matter of fact, everything that ever was, is now, or ever will be, is a part of that being that I call God. When you hear me talk about God, I'm not talking about something out in outer space or sitting on a cloud. I'm speaking about the sum total. When you add up everything that ever was, is now, ever will be, when you add up the sum total, when you add up the Alpha and Omega, that's the being that I'm talking about that I call God. And knowing that indeed God is almighty, I know that there's nothing that God can't do, because God has all the might, all the power. And knowing that is my prayer. I am praying, asking God right now, that no matter whatever it is that God has in store for you and for me in this upcoming week, no matter whatever plan that God has for us, that God blesses you and me with peace. Until we meet again here next week on The Message, may God Almighty bless you and yours with peace.